net. Hands to Woody. Up the middle. Touchdown! And Iowa State is won it! Jeff Woody took it in! And the Cyclones have upset the nation's second-ranked team! They did it!
All right. Welcome back to the Cyclone Fan Perspective, presented by Play the Fight Song podcast, where we cover all things college football. Thank you for listening in, but today we are going to dive into the Iowa State-Kansas game this Saturday, November 4th. Also, shout out to our one of our producers or one of our hosts, Camden Parks, for that awesome intro. It's always great to go back and relive the great Jeff Woody run, and Iowa State rocked the BCS world, and now we're heading into a 12-team playoff thanks to the Cyclones. So a little bit of a nice throwback there. But let's talk about the real game Saturday. Iowa State hosts Kansas. This is a 6 o'clock kick on ESPN. And, man, if you'd have told me Iowa State and Kansas were kind of battling for a top 3 spot in the Big 12 race in late November, even a month ago, might have thought you were on something. To see that both of these teams are in this position it's been surprising to my part. Kansas, as you can see on the information below, is 24th in the AP, but I believe just the college football playoff rankings came out tonight, being Tuesday, and they are now 21st, I believe, ahead of a couple of other Big 12 schools, being Oklahoma State, who they lost to, and Kansas State, who they have yet to play yet. Let's talk about Kansas, though. For those who haven't been paying attention to this team, it's been kind of a roller coaster for them. I think everybody kind of has their eyes on this football team right now, coming off probably one of the bigger upsets of the country and of the year, beating Oklahoma at home. They won for the first time against Oklahoma since 1997. They won that football game 38-33, which not only made it interesting for their season, but really for the entire Big 12 slate going forward this year. And now there's 5 teams fighting for first place this weekend. We'll actually cover the Big 12 slate at the end. There are massive games within the conference outside of this one in Ames. But, man, if you're an Iowa State fan, you've got to be just ecstatic about this one. For those who are going to be in Ames this weekend, I envy you. This is going to be a great one. It sounds like the weather is going to be awesome at kickoff, about like mid-50s. So you really couldn't ask for a better night game in Jack Trice Stadium with meaningful football in November. Outside of the Oklahoma game, Kansas is 5-2 on this, or 6-2 on the season. Sorry. Not really a ton of games highlight their year that are worth noting about. I go back to the Oklahoma State game. They lost coming out of the bye week, or before their bye week. They lost 39-32 in Stillwater. The rest of the games, not really worth noting. They got killed by Texas on the road. They beat some of the newcomers pretty handily in BYU and UCF. They went on the road and beat a really bad Nevada team early in September, and they beat a Missouri State team and an Illinois team at home in early September. So the Jayhawks have been tested this year for sure. I think we kind of know what we're going to expect out of this team going into November. But outside of last Saturday, I hadn't seen this team really perform over its expectations and really got a big win. So last week, I think, really took the monkey off their back as far as their race into the Big 12 this year. First of all, I want to cover the injuries going into this game on both sides because I think they're big ones. Matt Campbell came out and said today at his press conference that Jeremiah Cooper, the star safety / kind of nickel position, is 50-50 for kickoff on Saturday. In Matt Campbell terms, that could mean he might never see the field the rest of the year, and that could mean there's no question he will play on Saturday. I'm not sure exactly what happened. I do know he kind of went out in the fourth quarter, but I'll take it for what it is. I think it's a pretty decent-sized loss if Cooper isn't willing to go, but I don't think it's detrimental because I know in last week's recap versus Baylor, I talked about TJ and Malik are kind of bigger pieces of that defense, but Jeremiah has been awesome all year, and he's definitely probably a second team, at least Big 12 kind of guy. So if we lost him, that would definitely limit the secondary just a little bit. For Kansas, another side of their good secondary, Mello Dotson played only 7 snaps last week when he went out in the Oklahoma game, but on his 4th snap, he had a pick 6. So he's a big playmaker for them. He has 2 picks on the year for the secondary. That's kind of the highlight of their defense. And if he's not willing to go either, that's a big loss for Kansas in their defense. I think Dotson being out would probably be more important than Cooper being out on the Iowa State side, because I trust John Heacock to fill a spot with Darian Porter or Jamison Patton or whoever it may be, or even Ben Nickel, maybe at the safety position. I trust that Heacock can fill in that spot rather than Dotson, who kind of is tied on first on the team in interceptions for Kansas. But the biggest question is Jalen Daniels. Preseason Big 12 Player of the Year, quarterback for Kansas, hasn't really played in much this year. We haven't seen him in quite some time. He's warmed up. He warmed up last week versus Oklahoma. That was the first time he's done that since September. But according to the 247 Sports for Kansas, he hasn't participated in any 11-on-11 stuff. I said last week on the podcast that Leipold was optimistic about him playing this year sometime, but it doesn't really seem like Saturday we're going to see him. And maybe he's just trying to keep teams honest, but I think the jig is up. My personal prediction, I think Bean's the guy the rest of the way. And Daniels just can't get rid of a back injury. If any of you ever had a back injury, it's just kind of a muscle thing that just doesn't go away very easy. So I think Bean's the guy, and let's kind of talk about it. Let's talk about some of the players to watch out for Kansas this week, including their star quarterback, Jason Bean. He's a former North Texas transfer. He transferred in a couple of years ago. He actually started the last time Kansas played in Ames on that season where I think they won 3 games, but different story this year. He's been rock solid for them ever since Daniels has been out. He's completing 60% of his throws. He has over 1,100 yards already, and he's got 9 touchdowns and 4 picks on the year. And he can do a lot with his legs. I think that's pretty similar with Daniels. Like, they didn't miss a step when Bean went in because of how similar those two really complement each other. I think Daniels is a way more accurate quarterback. I think that's where Iowa State can take advantage of Bean. But the way he uses his legs concerns me. And we'll get into that on the defensive side for Iowa State. But really, when you look at this Kansas football team outside of their star quarterback, you want to look at the 2 stud running backs. Devin Neal gets about 14 carries a game, 96 yards per game. He's got 7 touchdowns on the year. He's their playmaker. Anytime you see Kansas winning a big football game, he's probably going to hammer out a 75-yard touchdown run. The other guy is their power back in Daniel Highshaw. He gets about 10 carries per game. He's averaging about 61 yards per game. He's got 8 touchdowns on the year. So combined, they have 15 touchdowns on the year. And honestly, for 2 running backs in the Big 12 to average over 60 yards per game kind of tells you how much they really rely on these two. You'll see Highshaw on a lot of red zone opportunities, 3rd and short opportunities. He's going to be the guy they want to get the ball to get a short yardage or to get a touchdown. When you look at the receivers, looking back at compared to, say, Baylor, who we saw last week, I think Baylor has a better receiving core than Kansas really brings. But I think they do have some pieces that can maybe give Iowa State some issues. Lawrence Arnold and Mason Fairchild are their 2 leading receivers statistically. Fairchild's their big tight end. He actually leads the team in receiving yards, and he's going to be a guy that could possibly present an opportunity to take advantage of for Iowa State. But I look back at the season, and Iowa State has seen much better tight ends, specifically we look at that Iowa game. We all know what Iowa brings to the tight end room each and every year, and they handled Lachey, they handled Eric All. I don't think Fairchild's going to be that big of a mismatch for these secondary and really for Verdona, the safeties. The other guy is Luke Grimm. He leads the team for receiving touchdowns. He's kind of a guy that going into the red zone. I think he even had a touchdown on Iowa State last year. So those are really the 3 receivers that you should look out for as far as playmaking goes on that side. When you talk about this defense, it's not a team that statistically has been very good this year, but I think they've got guys on either the front 7 or the back 4 that can really create havoc and create a difference in a football game, and particularly this one versus Iowa State. Kobe Bryant and Kenny Logan are 2 guys that highlight in the secondary. Logan plays safety. He leads the team in tackles. Kobe Bryant is a all Big 12 caliber corner. He's a guy who can get a pick 6. I think he got one off Deckers last year. He has 2 interceptions this season, and I believe he has one of those as being a pick 6. Like I said, Logan is a guy on the back end too. He's a physical safety. He's an aggressive safety. He's going to be up in the box a ton. And if Iowa State's going to struggle in the run game, it's probably because he's creating havoc and filling up holes. Austin Booker on the D line is somebody you want to keep an eye out for on the Kansas side. He leads the front seven in tackles. He has 6 sacks on the year. That's a pretty good stat. I think he's a guy that can get after a young Iowa State offensive line if he wants to create havoc. Kansas, surprisingly, is second in the Big 12 in sacks. So we'll talk about the defense a little more, but this is a really aggressive group, and you can tell because they're first in the league in forced fumbles. They have 11 forced fumbles on the year. They're not as high as Iowa State as far as interceptions rate goes. I think they have about 8. 2 of those being pick sixes, if that means anything, but they really like to be aggressive when they're trying to tackle you. I don't think they can tackle very well because of how aggressive they are. They just want to strip the ball from you. And on passing downs, I think they want to bring in a lot of blitzes and they want to create a lot of havoc just with the high rate and sacks that they have on the season. Some of the big notes you want to highlight statistically from both Iowa State and Kansas. Kansas ranks 4th in rush yards per game in the Big 12. I talked about before, they go to Highshaw, they go to Neal. They're going to rely on these two to really carry the load when they go on the road in Ames. Kansas ranks 107th in rush defense. We'll talk about that in a bit. They give up 170 yards per game. That is a lot. And we knew that this defensive line wasn't very physical, but they bring so much havoc and they bring a lot of pressure that they're either going to rely on a stuff at the line or they're probably going to give up 7 yards a pop. So they're either going to bring a blitz and make a big play, or Iowa State can take advantage of a 6 to 7 yard carry. Kansas ranks 13th in third down conversions offensively. They're really efficient at staying on the field. That's not a surprise when you look at a Lance Leipold offense. This is a guy who knows how to manage quarterbacks, whether it's Daniels, whether it's Bean, and the guy just puts out proficient offenses year after year, pretty much since his second year in Kansas. So Iowa State on their offensive side, they rank 29th in red zone offense, which is really, I think that's a complete 360 from looking at last year. I think that's one of the reasons Tom Manning got fired, is just because how poor they were in the red zone. They didn't capitalize, and that's really been the story this year. Their 90% conversion rate once they enter the red zone, that is going to be absolutely huge on Saturday when looking at this. When I look at one game, if you guys go back and watch any Kansas game this year, go back and watch the Oklahoma State game. I think that one can tell a lot at where Iowa State can take advantage of Kansas this Saturday. It was a game where Kansas came in hot. Bean was firing. I think he threw for over 400 yards. He had 5 touchdowns. They had an opportunity to slam the door on the road at Oklahoma State. And then the second half, it kind of turned for the worse. Oklahoma State got really aggressive, and Bean threw a couple really costly picks. So they turned the ball over a lot in the second half, but they had the capability of coming out really hot and getting after Oklahoma State. And it just shows that if you create a couple of turnovers on this football team, good things can happen, especially when they're on the road. So talking about that, keys to the game. The first one I want to work on is capitalize on the big plays. Kansas is really aggressive on defense. I've highlighted that. They're either going to rely on a turnover or a sack. They're really high rate in sack, and they have, like I said, 11 forced fumbles this season. So what does that mean for Iowa State? This is a big play opportunity for Jaden Higgins. I think last week they left one on the door when Higgins had that little slant go route and he could have turned it into a 70-yard touchdown. I think you can get some of the same results this Saturday. I think it's also a big run opportunity for Norton or Sanders. I think both of those two have been really, really solid. Norton had that huge breakout run that kind of changed the game for Iowa State. I see a similar opportunity for those two on Saturday. If we see Abu Sama again, I think he can turn it into a big play as well. But freshman, especially against this defense, he's got to put 2 on the ball. He can't be giving up fumbles because that's going to cost him on Saturday. Rocco has to make big throws. So them being aggressive on defense, Rocco's got to make the big throws. He can't miss Jackson like he did. He can't miss Higgins like he did in that Baylor game. He's got to make all the throws. When there's a guy wide open in the secondary, he's got to make that 20, 25-yard throw, because with how aggressive Kansas is to try to pick him off into a pick six or to force a fumble, there are going to be Iowa State receivers who break out and get downfield and get wide open. So Rocco's got to just remain calm, deliver those throws, and capitalize on them when they do present themselves. The key number 2 is I think Iowa State needs at least 2 interceptions on Saturday. And I think that's going to hurt our chances if Jeremiah Cooper's out, but I don't think it's impossible. Iowa State ranks third in the nation in interceptions. They have 13 on the season. Being, like I talked about in that Oklahoma State game, man, like what turned the tide for him? He had 2 crucial interceptions, and Oklahoma State capitalized on both of them and eventually took the game away. And that's when it's a 7-point game on the road. You can't be throwing those kind of throws. And I think that's where Iowa State can take advantage of it. Iowa State's a little different as far as schematically compared to Kansas, because Iowa State can afford to kind of sit back and almost wait for those throws to happen. You saw last week they didn't get a ton of pressure on Baylor. They kind of just sat back and waited for those to pick it off. They gave Shapen a ton of time. He thinks he sees a guy downfield. He tries to go for that 60-yard bomb, and Malik Verdone comes out of nowhere to make a huge play. That's how Iowa State's going to get turnovers, and that's how Iowa State's going to get interceptions on Saturday. It's not going to be jumping routes. It's not going to be sending a bunch of blitzes. It's just going to be sitting back, relying on how good this secondary is, and then setting up an interception to jump on. So they need at least 2 on Saturday to win the football game. My last point is force Bean to beat you with his arm. Okay. He really can capitalize when he uses his legs. I think, again, in that Oklahoma State game, what he was so successful in the second half, or in the first half, he was able to use his legs and get first downs. I think right before he threw his first interception, in that Oklahoma State game, he had some words to the Oklahoma State student section after he broke out like a 20-yard run, and then he just dismantled in that second half. So before he was using his legs, he was really efficient. He had a ton of touchdowns, a lot of yards. Once they kind of contained him, he had to use his arm every single time, and I think that's where you can capitalize on him. That's the one concern I think I have for Iowa State this week. You saw it with Ohio. Their quarterback was able to get outside the pocket. I think it was a completely different team. I think Iowa State was kind of struggling fatigue-wise with a bunch of different things at that game. But, I mean, Rourke got outside the pocket and rushed on them way too many times. Even if it was just a 5-yard scramble, that's still 5 yards you had to give up. And it was an opportunity that Ohio kept staying on the field. Kansas is really efficient on third downs. I covered that. So even if we're giving up 4 or 5 yards of scramble to Bean, like, that's enough to get them first down after first down and keep them on the field. So if I have one concern, it's letting him use his legs and get outside the pocket. But I think with the emergence of Iziagu, with Joey Peterson, Onyedim, I like Dominic Orange and J.R. Singleton, I think there's depth on this defensive line to where I don't think they're going to get slowed down in the fourth quarter. And I think they're going to continue to contain Bean and get after him when it gets tight in the fourth quarter and things start to get a little hectic. Couple of things to note. The line has moved. I think it was a pick 'em, and now Iowa State's favored by 2.5. So sharps are on Iowa State. That doesn't mean anything. We've seen it before, but Iowa State has covered the last few games when they were on the road at Cincinnati and on the road at Baylor, where they won it. Iowa State was also a 2-point favorite against Ohio, and so we've seen it all before. So the 2.5 line doesn't mean much, but when you're at home, maybe good things can happen. So if I have to put a bow on it, I think Iowa State wins this football game. I think they remain atop of the Big 12, tied for first place, depending on the other games. But what I'm going to trust is the defensive line has gotten better. I think they're going to continue to get pressure on Bean all 4 quarters because of the depth. And that being said, I think they can stay patient and finally get some big picks in the second half. And, man, I think Kansas's defense is not very good. I've talked about it all year. I think while they brought back, I think their entire back 7 from last year, it's still a group that relies on aggressive plays, but they'll give up a ton of big plays. And I think that's where Rocco has been so efficient this year. I don't think he's going to get caught into a bad pick 6 like he did against Oklahoma, like Iowa. He's smarter than that. He's gotten better as the year has gone on. He takes advantage of a wide open Jaden Higgins or a Jalen Knoll. I think this game is wraps. I think Iowa State can win by 10 or 14 points. Limit the turnovers, no bad picks, hands on the football when they're trying to force it. No turnovers on Iowa State's side, get a couple picks here and there. Continue to make kicks. Chase Contreras, field goals cost this one last year in Lawrence too, so I think that's something to highlight. But either way, I think Iowa State's just a much smarter team than they were a year ago when they went to Lawrence. I think they're going to get it done at home, and Jack Trice is going to be absolutely on fire for this night game. So that's where I got Iowa State. It's going to keep them at first in the conference. So what does that mean? If you're a Cyclone fan and they get the job done, you got to be paying attention to that Oklahoma State game. I think that's a 2:30 kick. So we're going to know before even the Iowa State game gets started. Two teams who are in that tied for first as well, in Texas and Kansas State. So those four teams who are all in first place play each other. So you're guaranteed that two other teams are going to be tied for first place, but two teams are going to fall if Iowa State can hold on here. So huge, huge opportunity for Iowa State to win at home. And then they got an interesting one in Provo, which I will be at. So I can't wait to talk about it a little bit, but let's take 1 week at a time. I think Iowa State's got a great opportunity this Saturday, and I got the Cyclones winning. If I got to put a prediction on it, I think Iowa State will win 30 to 21 at home. I think Iowa State's offense is good enough to keep points on this Kansas defense, and Kansas is good at offense. They got a lot of big plays and they got a lot of big players. They're going to score their points. Iowa State fans just got to stay patient, wait for the fourth quarter to come around. Hey, if you're at the game, make an impact. Iowa State fans know how to make it rock, and I think they can make an impact at Jack Trice Stadium and help their Cyclones get a dub on Saturday. So that's all I got. Until then, we'll recap everything that is. We might have a special guest in my recap episode, win or lose. And as always, you know what it is. Go Cyclones.